diplomat and a distinguished non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council, who joins us from Washington. Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We are at this point in the fifth week of the war. More than 4,750 people have been killed so far, most of them in Iran, more than 1,000 of them in Lebanon. And we're hearing from, for example, the White House Press Secretary, Caroline Leavitt, that the U.S. operations are, quote, proceeding according to plan. The president says things are on track. How do things look to you?
Thank you so much for having me. Well, I believe that we have seen many different iterations coming out of the White House since the beginning of this conflict. And we heard from the Secretary of Defense this morning saying that the Iranians still have the capability to use missiles to strike back. He's stating what we already know, what we've seen. This is in spite of week after week increased strikes, intense strikes, and saying that we had decimated their ability. This is an indication, certainly from the Secretary of Defense, that what was expected at the beginning of this conflict is not where we are now. But in every war, plans are living documents. They change as they meet the realities on the ground. So I would say from the beginning, no, things are not going as planned, but those plans have changed, and the administration, certainly the U.S. military, is extremely adaptable, and we are where we are today.
But Ambassador, a lot of the people we're speaking to are giving us this sense that somehow they think President Trump underestimated Iran as an adversary, and that he's bitten off more than he can chew. Would you subscribe to that?
I would. I think there was a lack of expertise, certainly from the department. The president uses special envoys, people who are personally loyal to the president, friends, real estate moguls, but not people who have a deep understanding of the history in the region, the Iranians themselves. Those of us who were working in the region during the Iraq-Iran war remember the horrific losses that the Iranians took during that war without any suggestion that they were going to surrender, to submit. And so just that incident with the United States was certainly observing should have given pause to anyone thinking that a quick decapitation of leadership, shock and awe, would have a long-term impact on how the Iranians decided to prosecute this war.
Right. I mean, it's not just the US that seems to think everything is on track. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is quoted as having said more than half of the operation's military aims have now been achieved. So perhaps that gives us an indication about timeline that, according to him, we're about halfway through. But would you say the aims of the Israelis and the aims of the Americans are aligned?
At times, certainly. That's how both of us got into this war. However, from the beginning, it is an existential battle for the Israelis. They do believe that Iran, a nuclear-capable Iran, would threaten the very existence of their country. It is existential for the Iranians, certainly for the leadership, those who remain, that if the United States and Israel are successful, they will be gone. Of course, it has never been existential for the United States. The homeland cannot be reached. It was safe. It is why there is such low support for this war. The American people do not understand why we've engaged at this time. That said, certainly, Americans want to win the conflict and leave the region and our allies in a better place. That looks increasingly difficult because the Iranians are taking no prisoners with their response. It is a logical response if it is indeed an existential threat.
Ambassador, let's talk a bit about the talks, the diplomacy that's taking place. I mean, there's a bit of mystery surrounding the talks because the United States isn't telling us who they're talking to. Iran's denying they're talking to anybody. The US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, he's offered some insights. He says that there are some internal fractures, and he's not going to reveal the identities of the people that the US is speaking to precisely for that reason. Does that sound right to you?
I'm certain it is. I mean, as the Israelis have eliminated a number of the Iranian leadership, even the ones that might have been logically the interlocutors that have been considered pragmatists, I'm thinking of Mr. Laranjani, for example, are gone. With the Israelis taking out Iranian leadership, they are staying hidden. They are staying quiet. That means their communications is difficult. They may have problems with who is in charge, how to communicate, what can be conceded, what should be demanded if there are indeed talks going on. What I do believe is happening is that Iranians and Americans are talking to the mediators, so as often was the case with regard to Oman during the negotiations, passing messages and positions back and forth. So there is some diplomacy going on behind the scene. It just doesn't look like what the president has described.
Right. I mean, we've heard the president issue some pretty strong words to traditional US allies in the last 24 hours.
Mm.
He says, for example, France has been, quote, very unhelpful. He's saying that other countries, I think he singled out the United Kingdom, should learn how to fight for themselves. This with reference to taking back control of the Strait of Hormuz. I wondered how widely felt it is in Washington right now that the US has been somehow let down by its allies.
That's a challenging one. I mean, certainly the military uh, would want to be in contact with and coordinating with allies, but there is a clear understanding, not only in Washington but beyond in the United States, that this was an American war of choice, and that as we do not like to get dragged into wars by others, certainly our allies have the same position. So there's a level of disappointment. Certainly, it makes the task harder in some degree to work from bases that are not as close as we might like for this campaign. There is an understanding that we went forward, we didn't consult, we didn't inform, and there are costs to that. And certainly, the continuing insults from the president do not help. There's an old author who wrote a book about how to win friends and influence people, and insulting them is not the way.
Sure. And I mean, I just want to pick up on that. I mean, do you think a coalition could have been built had President Trump made a case for one and explained the objectives from the get-go to America's allies?
Perhaps, and I say perhaps because no one is regretting the loss of the supreme leader, the difficulties that the Iranian regime is under right now. They were horrific to their own people. They were ostracized from the rest of the international community. Things that the international community thought were reasonable steps with regard to modifying their nuclear program, stopping support for proxies who sowed destruction throughout the region. No one's regretting that. However, there are those who would like to get back to some semblance of international law. And certainly the rest of the world is paying the cost of this war that is now in place with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, with the rise in oil prices, other commodities. If the Houthis engage enthusiastically, that's going to have an impact on the Red Sea. And again, it's got an impact on everyone. So consultations beforehand may have helped soften that road for cooperation, but there was always a great deal of hesitation about getting into this. Certainly the partners in the region understood if it wasn't done well, quickly, and successfully, that they would pay the cost, and they are.
Right. And in the same way, President Trump didn't make a case to America's allies. He didn't make a case to the US public either. An opinion poll suggests this conflict is far from being popular in the United States. How much pressure do you think President Trump is now under to end this war?
He's definitely under pressure to do so. It's far enough away from the midterm elections that he thinks he's got some more time. If it does indeed end with a clear concession from the Iranians about their nuclear program. We know that their military capability is far less now, perhaps less support for the proxies. Then he can point to something that he has made the region and Americans safer. But we also know that all of the weapons and methods that the Iranians, from them directly and via their proxies, to endanger Americans at least, had nothing to do with their nuclear capability, had nothing to do with their Navy or their missile capability. It was terrorist activity, IEDs, speedboats, when we think of the USS Cole. And none of that is completely put at bay by this war. But the closer we get to the midterm elections, and certainly Republicans in the House and the Senate are extremely worried and upping the pressure to find a successful way out of this.
Right, and the Iranians are only too aware that the clock is ticking ahead of the midterms, and we're looking at a state where petrol or gasoline, as you call it over there, has crossed the $4 a gallon mark for the first time in more than 3 years.
I paid it myself.
Yeah, well, I think I can imagine how that must feel to fill up a car at those sorts of prices. But how soon do you think President Trump needs to end this conflict if he's to mitigate the damage that looks like it's already been done to him and his party in November?
He, I believe, thinks he's got a few more weeks. You know, they've given that timeline of up to 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. It depends on how it's done. He has laid several markers about how he might do it by saying that the regime has already been changed. Certainly the military capabilities have been decimated, 90% perhaps out. The Navy, Iran is in a much weaker position. The danger, of course, is leaving it as a wounded bear. What might it do to regroup, to exert itself? What pressures might it be putting on its neighbors in the region? The danger for the Iranian regime, because even as we talk about their ability to wait out the United States, they are taking horrific hits, horrific damage to their infrastructure. If indeed we knock out their ability to produce and sell oil, they will be in a horrific position that may do more to undermine their ability to stay in power than the war itself. So I believe the president has a few more weeks, but it really does depend on how clearly and credibly he is able to point to this as successful.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, former US diplomat and ambassador. Thank you very much indeed for your time, madam.
My pleasure.